The morning of my brother's wedding, I stood in a hotel corridor holding a flute of champagne I hadn't touched, listening to him explain me to his groomsmen. "She's always been like that," Marcus was saying, his voice carrying through the cracked door of the suite. "Borrows and never repays. Classic burden. I invited her because Mom would have made it a whole thing otherwise." His best man Derek laughed. "At least she cleans up well." More laughter. Someone said something I didn't catch and then Marcus said, "She means well. She just never figured out how money works." I stood there for exactly 4 more seconds. I counted them. Then I straightened the strap of my dusty rose bridesmaid dress, took a small sip of the champagne, and walked back toward the bridal suite where Marcus's fiancée Priya was having her veil adjusted. I smiled at Priya in the mirror. She smiled back. She had no idea. As far as she knew, I was Marcus's quiet little sister, the one who worked in finance stuff, lived modestly in a downtown apartment, and showed up reliably for every family event without ever causing a scene. Nobody in my family knew what I actually did. And for 4 years I had preferred it that way. But standing in that corridor hearing my brother reduce 8 years of my life, and 4 years of his company's survival, to the words classic burden, something quietly finally shifted. I didn't cry. I didn't confront him. I just took out my phone, typed a message to my financial director and set it aside unsent. I would decide later whether to press send. My name is Serena Okafor. I am 34 years old. I run a private equity fund out of Chicago called Meridian Capital Group, which currently manages just under $2.1 billion in assets across 17 portfolio companies. I did not inherit this. I did not marry into it. I built it between the ages of 26 and 34, mostly in silence, mostly alone, mostly in the early hours of the morning before the rest of the world was awake. My brother Marcus is 38. He is charming, handsome, and socially gifted in ways I never was. Growing up in our parents' house in Atlanta, he was the one who filled the room. Every birthday party, every school play, every Sunday dinner. Marcus was the gravitational center. I orbited. That was the arrangement, and for most of my childhood I accepted it without question, the way you accept weather. Our father ran a mid-size construction firm. Our mother taught elementary school. We were comfortable, not wealthy. When I was 12 and Marcus was 16, I noticed something that I never quite forgot. Marcus could ask our father for money and receive it immediately, warmly, without documentation. When I asked for the same amount for a school investment club, I was 12 and had already read 3 books on compound interest. My father laughed and told me to ask my mother. I asked my mother. She gave me half and told me not to tell Marcus. I turned that half into enough to fund my own school supplies for the next 2 years. My father never knew. I tell you this not to establish grievance. I am not interested in grievances anymore, but because it explains why I learned early to build quietly. I had no other option. In the geography of my family's attention, I was the interior. Marcus was the coastline. When I graduated from the University of Michigan with a degree in finance and a minor in computer science, Marcus threw a party for himself the same weekend. He had just been accepted into a local MBA program, and the family's collective joy was such that my graduation dinner was rescheduled twice and ultimately became a lunch at a chain restaurant where my father spent 40 minutes on his phone. My mother held my hand across the table and said, "We're proud of you, baby." I believe she meant it. I moved to Chicago at 23 with $14,000 in savings, a contact at a mid-tier investment firm, and absolutely no intention of asking my family for anything ever again. By 26, I was a senior analyst. By 28, I had left the firm and was managing a small private fund for 3 clients I'd cultivated on my own. By 30, Meridian Capital Group was registered, capitalized, and operating. By 32, we had closed our first institutional round. By 34, the fund held $2.1 billion in managed assets, and I had a team of 11 people, a corner office with a view of Lake Michigan, and a quiet personal net worth that would have made my father's construction firm look like a lemonade stand. My team knew who I was. My clients knew who I was. The financial press knew who I was. Meridian had been mentioned in the Wall Street Journal 3 times, and I had given one carefully selected interview to a trade publication read almost exclusively by institutional investors. I kept a deliberately low public profile. No Instagram. No speaking circuits. No Forbes profile, though we had been approached twice. My family knew none of this. Not because I was ashamed. Not because I was punishing them, but because the one time I had tried to share a professional milestone. A call to my mother at 30 to tell her I had registered my own firm. She had spent most of the call telling me that Marcus had just been promoted to VP of sales at a tech startup, and wasn't that wonderful? I said it was wonderful. I did not call back about the firm. The startup Marcus had joined was called NovaBridge Technologies. It built logistics software for mid-market supply chains, genuinely useful, technically competent, but severely undercapitalized. Within a year of Marcus joining, the company was 18 months from collapse. Their Series B had fallen through. Their original lead investor had pulled out. The CEO, a man named Raymond Cho, was quietly desperate. I found out through my own deal flow. NovaBridge crossed my desk as a distressed opportunity. I had my team run the numbers. The fundamentals were solid. The technology was real. The problem was purely structural. They needed patient capital from someone who understood the space and wouldn't panic at the 18-month horizon. I authorized the investment under a holding entity called Lakeview Horizon Partners. $78 million over 4 years, deployed in tranches. Raymond Cho never met me in person. He communicated through my director of private investments, a woman named Caroline Marsh, who represented Lakeview in all board communications. I knew Marcus worked there. That was not incidental. It was actually part of why I looked harder at the deal. I wanted to understand his world. And perhaps, if I am being fully honest, there was something else. I wanted to know that if his company collapsed, I would not be the reason. I did not tell him. I did not tell anyone in my family. For 4 years, I sat on the other side of an invisible wall from my brother's professional life, keeping his company solvent, watching it grow, watching him take credit for stability he didn't understand the source of. I attended his quarterly calls to his mother, our mother, in which he described NovaBridge's fundraising success as a testament to his sales leadership. I said nothing. I went to Christmas. I attended birthdays. I listened to my father brag about Marcus at every gathering while I sat quietly with my glass of wine and my private knowledge and my complete unwillingness to make a scene. I don't want you to think I was noble. I was not noble. I was strategic. And I was for a long time fine. Until the wedding. The ceremony was beautiful. Priya was radiant. Marcus cried at the altar, which surprised me. I had not seen him cry since childhood. For a moment, watching him, I felt something genuinely warm. He was my brother. We had grown up in the same house. He had taught me to ride a bike and defended me once, memorably, from a neighborhood boy who had pulled my hair. There was love there underneath everything. There had always been love there. But love and clarity are not the same thing, and I had spent too long confusing them. The reception was held at a hotel ballroom in Atlanta, the kind of venue that costs more than most people's annual salary. Marcus had told my mother it was all Priya's family's budget. Priya's family was generous, this was true. But I had seen the venue invoice in a forwarded email chain that included me, and I knew that Marcus and Priya had put $40,000 on a credit line he'd told our parents was already paid off. I had said nothing. It was not my business. Dinner was elegant. The speeches were warm. Derek, the best man, gave a toast that made the room laugh 4 times. Priya's maid of honor made the room cry. When it was my turn, I was not a bridesmaid, only a guest, so there was no formal obligation. Marcus made a point of not asking me to speak, which was fine. I had nothing rehearsed. What I had not expected was the conversation afterward. I had stepped out to the corridor for air. The groomsmen's suite door was cracked. Marcus's voice was relaxed, bourbon warmed, certain of his audience. She means well. She just never figured out how money works. I stood there and I thought about $78 million. I thought about 4 years of quarterly disbursements, of Caroline fielding Raymond's grateful calls, of Marcus presenting NovaBridge's investor relations as his own accomplishment at sales conferences. I thought about every Christmas dinner where he had gently, laughingly described me as still figuring it out, to aunts and uncles who nodded sympathetically. I thought about my father, who had never once asked me what I actually did. I went back inside. I danced twice. Once with my Aunt Gloria, once with a cousin I hadn't seen since 2019. I ate the salmon, which was excellent. I watched Marcus and Priya cut the cake and laugh and glow with the specific happiness of people at the beginning of something. At 10:47 p.m. I picked up my phone. I opened the message I had drafted to Caroline at 2:30 that afternoon. It read, "Initiate the withdrawal." I pressed send. Then I put my phone in my clutch and went to congratulate the bride. I want to tell you what happened next, but first I need to tell you about Caroline Marsh, because she is the reason any of this worked and she deserves the acknowledgement. Caroline had been with me since Meridian's second year. She came from a background in forensic accounting, which meant she was constitutionally incapable of missing a detail and morally opposed to leaving anything undocumented. She had processed every disbursement to Nova Bridge, maintained every communication record and kept a file, at her own insistence, called Lakeview, Complete History, which contained 4 years of wire confirmations, board communications, financial projections and correspondence. When I sent her those 3 words on a Saturday night, Caroline did not ask questions. She had the withdrawal notice prepared within 40 minutes and transmitted it to Nova Bridge's board of directors by midnight. The notice stated that Lakeview Horizon Partners, pursuant to Clause 14b of the investment agreement, was initiating full withdrawal of all remaining committed capital, effective in 72 hours, and that the fund's representative would be available Monday morning to discuss transition arrangements. Raymond Cho read it at 6:14 Sunday morning. I know this because Caroline told me later that he called her cell phone at 6:15. I flew back to Chicago Sunday afternoon. I had brunch with my closest friend, Nadia, who was the only person in my personal life who knew the full scope of what I had built. Nadia was a child psychologist with a practice in Lincoln Park and the most grounded human being I had ever met. She had been listening to my family stories for 10 years with the patience of someone who understood that the wound and the person carrying it are not always the same thing. I told her what I'd done over Eggs Benedict. She put down her fork. "How do you feel?" she asked. "I don't know yet," I said, which was the honest answer. "Do you want him to call you?" I thought about it. "I want him to understand something. I don't know if I want the call." Nadia nodded slowly. "Those are different things." "I know," I said. She picked her fork back up. "Let me know when you figure out which one you actually need." That was Sunday. By Sunday evening, Nova Bridge CFO, a man named Patrick Huang, had called Marcus's personal cell 4 times. Marcus had not yet connected the withdrawal to me. How could he? He didn't know Lakeview existed. He didn't know I existed in that context. But the math was beginning to be undeniable. $78 million doesn't leave a company quietly. Monday arrived with the clean, indifferent efficiency of all consequential days. By 9 a.m., Patrick had convened an emergency executive meeting. By 10, Raymond had called an extraordinary board session. By noon, they had issued an internal communication to senior staff about a significant capital restructuring event that required immediate strategic assessment. Marcus, as VP of Sales, was in every one of those meetings. He would have watched his CEO's face across the table. He would have heard the number. He would have heard the name, Lakeview Horizon Partners. At 2:17 p.m. Marcus called our mother. I know this because our mother called me at 2:45, her voice carefully neutral in the way it gets when she is managing information. "Have you heard anything about Marcus's company having some kind of problem?" she asked. "What kind of problem?" I said. "Something about an investor." Pause. "He said a company called Lakeview pulled out of some big investment." He sounded scared, Serena. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said. Another pause. Longer. "My mother is a perceptive woman. She has always been a perceptive woman. The attention she gave Marcus over me was never from lack of intelligence. It was from a calculus I had never fully decoded, something about visibility and expectation and the specific way our family had organized itself around the idea that the loudest one needed the most tending. "Do you know anything about this?" she asked. "I work in finance, Mom," I said gently. "I know a lot of things about a lot of companies." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Serena, I'll talk to Marcus when he's ready," I said. "Tell him I'm here." I hung up. I sat at my desk and looked at Lake Michigan for a long time. A colleague knocked and I waved him in and we spent 40 minutes discussing a completely unrelated portfolio company in Denver, and I was fully present for all 40 minutes, because that is what the work requires and the work has always been my anchor. Tuesday, Nova Bridge's board formally declared a liquidity crisis. This is a specific technical designation that triggers certain contractual obligations and begins a clock on restructuring negotiations. It is not bankruptcy. It is not collapse. But it is the kind of thing that gets noticed. By Tuesday afternoon, A brief item appeared on a financial industry news aggregator noting that NovaBridge Technologies had entered a liquidity review following the departure of a major anonymous investor. No names were mentioned. Lakeview was structured to protect my identity. But within certain investment circles the story began to circulate. Marcus called me at 6:52 p.m. Tuesday. I let it ring. I wasn't ready. Not because I was afraid of him. I had not been afraid of Marcus in a professional sense since I was 26 years old. But because I was still working out what I wanted this conversation to be. There is a version of this confrontation that is about winning. I had no interest in that version. There is another version that is about understanding, about two people trying to see each other clearly for the first time in a decade. I wanted that version. I wasn't sure Marcus did. I texted him, "I'll call you tomorrow. I'm in the middle of something." He texted back immediately, "Serena, please. Something really bad is happening at work." I put the phone face down. Wednesday morning I was on a 7 a.m. call with an institutional client in Singapore when my doorman called the intercom to say that a man was in the lobby asking for me. He said his name was Marcus Okafor and that it was a family emergency. I finished my call. It took 11 minutes. Then I told my doorman to send him up. Marcus looked like he hadn't slept. His shirt was wrinkled in a way that Marcus's shirts are never wrinkled. He has always been fastidious about his appearance. And there were shadows under his eyes that made him look, for the first time in my memory, genuinely old. I opened the door and stepped back to let him in. I didn't hug him. He didn't try. He walked into my apartment and stopped. I watched him take it in. The space, the view, the specific quiet quality of a home that has been arranged by someone with both taste and resources. It is not ostentatious. I am not interested in ostentation. But it is unmistakably the home of someone for whom money is not a constraint. "You live here," he said. "I live here," I said. He turned. "How long?" "For years." He nodded slowly, absorbing. Then, "Lakeview Horizon Partners." "Yes." He sat down heavily on my couch without being invited. I let it go. I made coffee, I needed something to do with my hands, and brought 2 cups to the living room and sat across from him. "That's $78 million, Serena. Across 4 tranches over 41 months, yes." He stared at me. "Why didn't you tell me?" This was the question I had been considering for 72 hours. I had 6 true answers and I sorted them by order of importance. "Because you would have changed how you acted at work if you knew," I said. "You would have either pulled back, not wanted to seem like you needed my help, or overclaimed. Either way the dynamic would have been distorted. I needed the investment to function cleanly." "That's a business reason," he said. "Yes." "Is there another reason?" I looked at him for a moment. "I wanted to watch you succeed on your own terms. I wanted to see what you were actually capable of without the weight of knowing I was behind it." A beat. "And I wanted to know that if things fell apart, I hadn't been the one who let them." He was quiet for a long time. Outside, a boat moved across the lake. "The wedding," he said. "Yes." "You heard me." "I heard you." He had the decency to look genuinely ashamed. Not the managed shame of someone calculating damage control. The real kind, the kind that comes with the physical understanding that you have been wrong about something for years and the wrongness is now visible and irreversible. "Serena," he started. "I don't need an apology right now," I said. "I need you to understand something first and then we can talk about what comes next." I got up. I went to my home office and returned with a folder. Not because I needed theater but because I believed in documentation the way Caroline had taught me to believe in it. Not as a weapon but as a record. A true account of what happened. I set it on the coffee table. That's a summary of every disbursement Lakeview made to NovaBridge. Dates, amounts, purposes. There's also a summary of NovaBridge's financial position at the time of each disbursement. What the company would have faced without that capital. I paused. Page 6 is a letter from Raymond Cho that he sent to my investment director after your Series C closed. He called Lakeview's investment, quote, "the difference between this company existing and not existing." Marcus didn't reach for the folder. He looked at it. "And there's something else," I said. Page 14. That's a transcript of the earnings call where you told analysts that NovaBridge's financial stability was a result of, and I'm quoting, "disciplined leadership and a lean operational philosophy." That was 6 months after our 3rd tranche kept the company from missing payroll. I said this without heat. It was a fact. It deserved to be stated as one. Marcus put his head in his hands. I sat back down and waited. I had learned to wait. It is one of the most useful things I know how to do. After a while he looked up. His eyes were red. I didn't know, he said. I genuinely didn't know. I know you didn't, I said. That's not the same as it not being true. What do you want from me? I want you to understand what you've been saying about me for the last decade, I said. Not to feel bad. Understanding is different from guilt. I want you to understand that while you were telling people I never figured out how money works, I was managing a fund that was keeping your company solvent. I want that to land. Really land. Not so that you feel ashamed every time you see me. That doesn't help either of us. But so that you understand the actual shape of what happened between us. He nodded. Fully. Several times. And the investment? He asked finally. Are you actually pulling it? This was the question I had asked myself 40 times since Saturday night. I knew what the professional answer was. I knew what the personal answer was. I had spent 2 days determining whether they were the same answer or different ones. The withdrawal notice is active, I said. The 72 hours expires tomorrow evening. Marcus said nothing. NovaBridge is a good company, I said. The fundamentals are real. Raymond is a capable CEO. The technology works. None of that changes because of what happened between us. Then, but I'm not going to be your anonymous backstop anymore, I said. That arrangement is done. If there's going to be any continued relationship between Meridian and NovaBridge, it happens on the table. Fully disclosed. Proper governance. You know who your investors are. Your board knows who your investors are. No more Lakeview. He was looking at me with an expression I hadn't seen on his face before. It wasn't quite awe and it wasn't quite grief and it wasn't quite the particular weariness of someone being rearranged. It was something that contained all three. You'd still invest? He said. That depends on a lot of things, I said. Including conversations we haven't had yet. And not just about the company. He understood what I meant. We sat in silence for a moment that felt longer than it was. I didn't know you were like this, he said. Not unkindly. Almost in wonder. I know, I said. That's also something I'd like us to fix. I won't tell you that Marcus and I resolved everything that Wednesday morning. That would be a satisfying lie and I don't deal in those. What I will tell you is that he stayed for 3 hours. We talked about NovaBridge and we talked about things that had nothing to do with NovaBridge. About our parents, about the geometry of our childhood, about the specific way a family can love two people unequally without intending cruelty. Marcus talked about our father in a way I had never heard him talk before, with something that sounded like ambivalence which surprised me. I had always assumed he had received our father's attention as pure gift. Turned out some of it had felt like weight. That surprised me. It also clarified some things. Before he left he said, I'm sorry. For the wedding. For all of it. I know that doesn't fix anything. It's a start, I said. A real start, not a polite one. He nodded. At the door he paused. Can I ask you something? Yes. Why the wedding? Why that night and not any of the other times? I thought about it. Because you were happy, I said. And you still chose to reduce me. I needed to know that even your happiness didn't change the story you'd built about me. Pause. It told me the story was going to keep going unless something interrupted it. He stood with that for a moment. Then he left. I called Caroline that afternoon and told her to hold the withdrawal pending further review. She didn't ask why. She said, whenever you're ready. That evening I sat in my office until the sky over the lake went fully dark. I thought about $78 million and what it had bought. Not NovaBridge survival. That was a financial transaction with a clear return. I mean the other thing. The 4 years of watching my brother from behind a curtain, the particular cold comfort of secret power, the way I had told myself I was protecting the investment when some part of me was also protecting something older and less articulable. The small girl who had been given half the money and told not to tell Marcus. There is a cost to building in silence. You get very good at it. You get so good at it that silence becomes your default and then your preference and then your identity, and then one day you are 34 years old and the person who should know you best in the world thinks you never figured out how money works. The investment had been real. The company had been sound. The decision to remain anonymous had been professionally defensible. All of that was true. And it was also true that I had used anonymity as armor, And that armor had costs I was only beginning to add up. Nadia texted me that night. How'd it go? I typed back, strange. Better than I expected and harder than I wanted. She replied, that's usually what it looks like when something actually changes. I put the phone down and sat with the quiet for a while. 3 months after the wedding, Meridian Capital Group made a disclosed, documented, board-approved investment in NovaBridge Technologies. The terms were different from Lakeview's: tighter governance, a formal seat on the advisory committee, quarterly reporting with full transparency. My name was on the term sheet. Raymond Cho called me personally to welcome me as an official partner. He said with genuine warmth that he had always wanted to meet the person behind Lakeview. I told him the feeling was mutual. Marcus sent me a text the day the deal closed. Said, proud of you. I mean it this time. I read it twice. I knew he meant it. I also knew that one sincere text did not rewrite 10 years of a story, and that what we were building now would take time and attention and the willingness on both our parts to keep showing up honestly. But it was a start. My father called me 2 weeks later. He had seen a brief mention of the deal in a trade publication. Someone had written a short item about Meridian entering the logistics software space. He called to ask if I was doing okay with all the finance stuff. I told him I was doing very well. He said, Marcus told me a little about what you do. He said you're quite successful. I said, I've worked hard. Pause. I'm proud of you, Serena. I should say that more. I held the phone and looked out at the lake. I had waited a long time to hear those words in that order from that voice. And now that they were here, I found that they were smaller than I had imagined and also, somehow, enough. Thank you, Dad, I said. He asked about the weather in Chicago. I told him it was cold. He said Atlanta was warm. We talked for 11 minutes about nothing consequential, and it was one of the better conversations we'd had in years. After I hung up, I sat quietly for a long time. Then I opened my laptop and went back to work. Some things resolve. Some things just become clearer. And sometimes the most honest ending is simply this. I am still here. I built something real. I am learning to let people see it. And the story, the true one, not the one told about me at wedding receptions, is still being written. I am the one writing it now. That is enough.